Welcome to the Untold Civil War, and we're going to be talking about the Pat Booth collection of Civil War photography coming up for sale, Fleischer's auctions. Adam Fleischer has been on the show a couple times, and we have seen some of the amazing things that come up in his sales. And today is going to be no different, and we're exploring this collection with John Walsh and Kevin Kanberg. Thank you so much for coming on the show, guys. I really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
So just to kick it off, John, if you want to tell us a little bit about Pat Booth and the Pat Booth collection, what are we talking about here?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up in a small town in southern Illinois, Flora, Illinois, and that's where Pat Booth also lived. And I had the great fortune of growing up around people that were interested in the Civil War at that time in the 80s. There was a lot of enthusiasm around it. You had a lot of the movies coming out, the shows, the Kanberg series, and as a young boy, I got wrapped up in that as well. And over the years, there were more people that started collecting, and it was interesting. Pat had always lived in Flora. He actually, when he came out of college, he graduated Southern Illinois University. He was actually a history teacher and taught history and government at West Frankfort High School, which is also in Southern Illinois. So that's really where his interest in history started. But kind of fast forwarding to where I was growing up, he started collecting right around the mid 1990s. And a gentleman that got him interested in collecting was the same one that got me started in Civil War at that time, and his name was Dennis Headley. And I think most collectors and people that were on social media were very familiar with Dennis, whereas Pat did not get involved in a lot of social media, but he attended a lot of the shows. Growing up around this, Pat and Dennis's collection started to grow, and they decided to put together a display and start taking it to the National Civil War shows. And this particular display they decided to call was Southerns. And it highlighted images, accoutrements, weapons, things of that nature, all of Southern heritage and representing a lot of it Western theater, to be more specific. So around 1997, I think it was around then, 95, 96, 97, Pat and Dennis started to take their display and their collection on the road. And some of the shows that you may have seen this in during the mid 1990s was the Nashville, the big Nashville Civil War shows at the fairgrounds, the Richmond Civil War shows, Gettysburg, Charleston. They took it to all the major shows all throughout the mid to late 90s and into the early 2000s. A lot of the images that you're going to see in this auction were a part of that collection. And also highlighted and displayed in that display. Pat was interesting in his collecting because he didn't collect it because of its value. He didn't collect it because somebody else wanted it. He collected it because it caught his eye. He collected it because it typically had historical relevance or significance with what he was doing in the display. And of all his collecting, images were his favorite and were the thing that he specialized mostly in. So what you see here and what Adam put up to auction for this upcoming sale is highlighting just his image collection. So that's a little bit of a teaser that there is more to come in terms of other items, but this is specifically Pat's specialty. It was his love of collecting. And I think, Kevin, when you were talking about how you were able to go through and catalog these images, I think anybody that goes through this catalog is going to see Pat's keen eye and his appreciation, and also his, how do I want to say it, unique eye to only collect some of the best. And that's what you see here.
And Kevin, if I can just bring you in real quick, when we're looking at these images, what are some of the things that we're looking for? Are we looking for clarity? I know sometimes we talk about condition versus content, but what generally are we talking about that an experienced collector is looking for when he looks at these images? What's going to stand out to him?
So, first of all, just handling Pat's collection is a real honor. You could see I've had the opportunity to have these objects in my hands. So I wasn't just looking at scans. I was examining these photos in hand, and these are meant to be seen in hand. Digital photos don't do justice, really, but you can see even in like the sort of digital format how these images pop and reflect his perspective as a collector. One thing that I can really appreciate about Pat's collection is that he loved a clear, simple portrait. I think he liked to study uniforms. I think he liked to study weapons. I think he was sort of I'm speculating a little bit based on what I see from his collection, but it's based on experience. Like he clearly liked to learn about these images, even the way they were packaged and sort of cared for with the notes that were kept with them. Like he treated these with an uncommon level of respect as a caretaker. And John, I love the story about how he sort of traveled with these. Like he wanted to share these with everyone. He set them up in a display. That takes effort, that takes time, that takes resources to do it. He wanted to teach people with these. And so I think what you see is a reflection of really many years of honing his eye and collecting really fine images that would interest not just those of us in the who are interested in Civil War photography, but people beyond that who just maybe were interested in history generally. So I love this collection. It's a focused collection. He clearly loved Southern photography. That he was clearly an advocate for these photos, and I think we have a heck of a catalog as a result.
No, I'm just scrolling through here and they're absolutely fantastic. I mean, every single one of them, ID'd or not, they tell a story. Just looking into these faces, these Civil War faces, they all tell a story, and it's just jaw-dropping to see what we have here. I think if I'm scrolling back up here, I wanted to click on this one right here. I know they talk about how Confederate images are pretty rare. Confederate naval images, I imagine they're even more rare. Uh, Kevin, can you
Very
tell us a little
scarce.
bit about this image right here?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously what, you've teed it up really well. Extremely, extremely rare image. And I have to ask, I know you asked me this question, but John, like when I was putting this together, this is a soldier named Hardin Littlepage.
Mhm.
I was totally fascinated by what his story. I'm just kind of curious, was this Pat's, this strikes me as something Pat was probably really, really, really excited to own.
Yep.
Given
So what was happening was, as the collection grew and was focusing more on Western theater infantry, both Dennis and Pat had kind of shifted hard right into collecting Confederate Navy. And both of them were starting to amass items that were related specifically to either Western theater Confederate Navy, but obviously a lot of it was out east, right, or in the Gulf Coast. So that's where this image comes from, with their initial interest in starting to collect Confederate Navy, and obviously this was towards the end of when Pat would stop collecting, obviously, but this is representative of his new interest, his newfound interest of Confederate Navy.
And he picked such a great story, like which is really consistent across a lot of the images that he collected. Like he was looking for identified images that were associated, not just identified images, but images that were associated with a person who had a really interesting story associated with them. And this is a fairly simple portrait, right? Just waist up. It's a nice clear picture. But what this man did, like his exploits were pretty remarkable, right? The CSS Virginia is stuck. It can't go up the James River. They have to scuttle it. They have to destroy it so it doesn't fall into Union hands. He has the foresight, under great stress, to save the ship's flag. And incredibly enough, that flag still exists 165 years later. You can go and see it. And this is the guy that had the foresight to do that. an incredible contribution to our shared history. And, simple portrait, but tells a big story.
Absolutely fantastic. And like I said, just you don't really come across stuff like this out in the wild every now. This
Oh,
is
you do not.
this is definitely something that anyone who's been collecting even for a few years to collecting for decades will tell you they don't come across that all the time.
I think to Kevin's earlier point is that this particular grouping of images offers something for everybody. Whether you're fairly new into photograph collecting to even the seasoned collector that's looking for something top shelf to add to your collection, I think you'll find something just within this group of 48 images. You're going to find something that will complement any collection out there.
Just to give you some perspective too, I this weekend I was in Hartford. I'm a board member of the Daguerrean Society, and we had our annual symposium up in Hartford at a museum there. And we have a photo fair every year. And it's not just daguerreotypes, it's all early photography, historic photography. People bring all sorts of formats of images there and all sorts of subject matter. And I was there, the show is an entire day. There's probably 45, 55 tables, something like that. I don't think I saw a single Confederate image at that sale. If there were, maybe there were one or two, maybe. There are 50 in this catalog alone, which is a remarkable move to the market, a really great opportunity for folks who collect if this is something that they collect.
Well, I'm going to click on this image and I'm going to just ask John real quick. Maybe this is a Western theater thing. I'm not sure. But so this is a collection of circus performers, right? Is that what we're looking at here? Or what is a battle shirt? What is this fantastic uniform we're looking at here?
Yep. What's interesting is Pat and several collectors that had seen this image had often attributed mostly the stars and the configuration of that shirt to either be potentially Louisiana. But what's interesting is the battle shirt itself is more of an overshirt to replace what we would commonly see as the jacket or the shell jacket or the sack coat. These battle shirts have kind of evolved over the years to kind of take on a life of their own with a story of their own, often attributed to like Quantrill's Raiders, the Missouri, Kansas border wars, things of that nature. But these were fairly commonly worn in the Western theater in the early part of the war. And, the one thing that I think drew Pat to these particular set of images were not only is it unique to have one image in this type of configuration, but now you've got two side by side. I think too, you see a lot of this in Missouri at Wilson's Creek, Belmont, some of those early battles, for example. But I think the clarity and what really drew Pat to this was the similarity in uniforms and having two images of two different soldiers wearing them, I think is what makes this intriguing.
And Kevin, we've kind of talked about this before on the show, but I see a little bit of coloring in the image. Can you talk a little bit about that? There are Civil War colored images, right? Maybe
there really are
in the traditional sense, but there are colored images, right?
Yeah, it's always good to remember that photographers, at least at that time, they like to many of them like to be thought of as artists first and foremost, and a lot of them came from painting or from like portrait painting before. So there's a kind of the idea of like coloring a photograph is really kind of hand in hand with the dawn of photography. And studios needed revenue streams. They didn't want to just sell you a picture. They wanted to sell you a nice case for the picture. They could color the picture for a little extra money. And so, they often employed colorists who would take these plates and apply some sort of highlight to them, or even really heavy tinting. Sometimes you see really wild, I have behind me is a great 14th Brooklyn image where the colorist added red like to their entire uniform to really emphasize the red legs, right? The red-legged devils. So here it's subtle. Maybe it's not subtle. They added a lot of tint to the cheeks, but it was meant to give it more of a lifelike quality. That's what they were trying to express here, that these people were alive. It gives them a little more of a three-dimensional quality. This is in my humble opinion, one of the more unforgettable images, or I guess pair of images in this case, in the sale. These uniforms are really unusual. They're really they're almost like playful. Like it's clearly like 3 different colors, so it's probably a red, white, and blue star. Remember, we were both using red, white, and the blue at the beginning of the Civil War. You know, so you really have something that's very difficult to forget, and that makes for a great photo.
Well, earlier on, John and I were talking about the hunt. You know, when you find that sort of niche that you're into, and hunting for that image, or hunting for that collection, hunting for those relics that you want to safekeep and store as a steward of history, as a caretaker. I know Confederate images can be very, very challenging, especially, you know, late war, maybe early war images. The uniforms weren't uniform. So, I mean, we're looking at this image here, double armed Texas Confederate here. Images like this are hard to really translate, right? To really break apart, but to a keen eye, you can do it, right? Just by looking at the weaponry. John, how do collectors go through that when looking at Confederate images? How do they find these?
Well, and we kind of talked about it earlier, right? Once at large, you're known to collect these certain types of images, both in good and a bad way. People start bringing them to you, knowing that you're going to be interested in them, right? And that's typically what had happened with Pat and Dennis's collection over time, was that it started to take on a life of its own, right? And people would show up, or they would identify or find these images for them. I thought this image was really interesting with the way the sword was positioned. The pistol was put out in front, not probably commonly worn there, but he made it a point to put that pistol out front to be seen. And, you know, Kevin, I thought you did a really nice job writing this image up, and really kind of painted that picture with this obviously focused look, sword in hand, pistol in front. The demeanor really painted this soldier and this individual quite nicely.
Yeah, you don't want to read too much into this, but part of the fun of owning these is sort of thinking about, you know, what was going on here. Where was this photo made? What was this man thinking? You know, what would he go on to experience? And there's something about his look here is just very intense. You know, and you know, he you know, at the risk of reading too much into it, he looks like he has a cause on his mind. And you know, and he wanted to give somebody that he cared about a representation of what he was feeling and what he looked like when he was feeling it. And there's all sorts of great subtleties when you're looking for Confederate images. And you're right, it can be very difficult to get your arms around the vast differences in uniforms and the irregularity of uniforms. And you know, it's so, you know, sometimes you look at the hardware of the images to try to give you clues, or the studio where it was taken can give you clues. In this case, the mat around this image can give you a little bit of a clue, which is once you start to look at enough of these, you recognize patterns. It's all about pattern recognition. And you say, okay, that mat really only appears in Southern photography. So that's a really good indicator, as long as you're pretty sure it's original to the image, that it's a Southern image. And you start to learn. It takes time, it takes practice, just like anything else. But those are the types
And
of things.
I'd say also too, even though it looks to me like a civilian style coat, right? You know, even though that might look like a civilian style coat, you know, I don't know too many people on the frontier, whether they're working on a farm, that they're going to carry a sword with the revolver. You know, if he's working on a ranch,
No,
he's probably not going to carry a sword. So the reason he has a sword and a revolver, it tells more of the story, right? We're digging
yeah.
in, we're looking at the tools. Like you said, you're looking at the backdrop. All of that gives us clues and insight into who this person is, right?
Exactly. And you know, this is, you know, again, that pattern recognition. You realize, you know, a lot of times you would enlist, and remember, these are all civilians, right? All of these guys were civilians the moment before they enlisted in their respective armies. They had day jobs, they were not soldiers, and then they became soldiers in an instant. And what they loved to do was rush to a photographer to show off the fact that they were a soldier. And sometimes they just didn't have all the gear yet, and the photographer would have some to borrow, or some weapons to make them look more warlike. You know, that's probably what's going on here, but absolutely great picture regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. And we're scrolling through this. Here's an interesting image that stood out to me just because of the content. VMI Cadet and Companion. Kevin, when you were holding this image, what did you think about?
These are I call these sweetheart images. I'm only making a guess of what their actual relationship with, but I think it looks like sort of an intimate pose. So whether it was a family member or maybe a love interest is kind of up to the eye of the viewer. But I always love images like this because I tend to think, and I kind of got hinted at this a little bit when we were talking about the last photo we focused on, is that this was a gift for somebody. Right. They wanted to present themselves before they went off to war. They wanted to present themselves before they entered into a really difficult period of time. They recognized that this was going to be challenging and difficult, and they wanted to take a nice portrait when they were vibrant and healthy, well dressed, well fed, as a token of their love or esteem. The fact that this is a VMI cadet makes it even more special because I think you may have even touched upon it in an episode of this show. I mean, they have kind of a remarkable record of service in the Civil War, and it's most likely that this man was part of that impressive history.
Well, John, real quick, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. If, I'm brand new to the Civil War, I'm just learning about all these words. When we're talking about VMI, when we're saying cadet, where does this character fall in the story of Civil War?
Obviously,
who exactly are we talking about here?
Yeah, so the VMI, we're talking about the Virginia Military Institute, of the VMI fame for anybody that studied Civil War, but this would be where Thomas J. Jackson, Stonewall Jackson would be one of the instructors of, and Kevin, you can remind me because I'm more of a Western theater guy, but the VMI cadets went into to battle just not north of VMI, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep,
and
Newmarket.
So, Newmarket, exactly. So I think part of the mystique around these colleges, whether it be West Point or VMI, or you have these young soldiers that are just coming out of their college years, right? Or they've gone to military school, and within in some cases months before graduating, now they're thrust into the largest and most significant military campaign of our country's history at that time, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a draw to these types of images, thinking about these young men who, because of their military education, we got to remember that as well, right? Because we're fairly young as a country, not really having fought any wars up until this time. So a lot of these young boys that are graduating these colleges or these military institutes are very soon going to be leading a company of 100 men, a regiment of 1,000 men, a brigade of several thousand men within a few years, and sometimes even quicker. So for me as a military historian, I look at these images and I'm thinking of this young man who not long after this picture was probably leading at the very least a company, and little did he know would be doing that as fast as I think either of them would have thought of. So
you'll have a anyone out there that's visited the battlefield in Newmarket, which I recommend that any of your listeners do visit. It's right off of I-81, and you can see it from the road. I think it actually kind of cuts across the battlefield, unfortunately, but regardless, what happened there is sort of flies under the radar. It doesn't get the headlines like a Gettysburg or Antietam does, but it was a really remarkable battle. And when you understand that students were like literal college students, basically, were fighting there, the images like this take on a little bit more of a significance. Like, I have no idea if this particular guy was there, but your mind kind of wanders in that direction, and it brings a little extra significance, I think, when you've walked what their path could have been.
It's definitely representative of that time period for sure.
Well, this image just stands out when we talk about the militia during the antebellum period. There were so many different units. I personally like the 79th New York Highlanders, right? And they had their Scottish garb. This sort of reminds me almost of the Continental Army. What are we looking here as far as this militiaman? Kevin, you handled this image. Do you want to give us some insight here?
Yeah, so there's two reasons that I really love this image. The first is it's nearly flawless. The fact that this thing survived as long as it has, with essentially looking like the day it was made is it puts it in a sort of a class above. That uniform that he has on, that there was a bit of a craze in militias around the country, peacetime militias. Like there was a bit of like a Continental Army craze, and a lot of militias like drew inspiration from the uniform styles of like the George Washington era, right? And so this isn't one of the more like direct examples, but you can tell that it was inspired by it. But the second thing I love about this image is actually what's included with it, which is a little newspaper clipping that has a poem in it, and it kind of implies that this guy was like a playboy. Like he must have been kind of a ladies' man. He sort of. Well, I'll let you read it for yourself and draw your own conclusions. But I kind of love the idea that this guy was, like who knows who got this picture and what his motivations were, but he might have really had a thing for the ladies.
Now, I definitely want to get to both of your favorite images that is in the collection. John, is there an image that stood out to you that you definitely want to talk about?
There were actually several, but you're actually looking at one right now, lot 19. As soon as I held this image, I fell in love with it. It is a 6 plate. I don't know what you thought about this image, Kevin, but when I looked at it, it really had that Western theater feel to it, both in the way that the uniform was constructed. You have and again, this is another one of those hand tinted images that the photographer tried to, take to the next level with both the cuff, the trimming of the cuffs, the cadet gray cuffs, the blue pants, the black stripe, highlighting that, gilding the buttons and the sword. But to me, this really screamed Western theater, Kentucky, Tennessee, and it's a young first lieutenant, kind of what we were talking about earlier, college years. This seems to be a very young soldier, first lieutenant, most likely brand new uniform, double row buttons. And what I really liked about the sword is if you were to go to a Civil War show, most people would pass up the sword that he's holding because it's not quote unquote military regulation for Civil War period. But that sword really, I think, accentuates the image. But I really like this image a lot. And just like some of the images, because Kevin mentioned this earlier, that were so clear, you can actually, under a lens, see the weave of the cloth of a lot of these images and what they're wearing. But this one really struck a chord with me, and I really liked it a lot.
Well, John, real quick about this, and I thought you just kind of scratched the surface on this. We looked at a previous image of possibly early war Texan Confederate, right? And in very homespun kind of civilian clothing. Here, there is no doubt that this is a Confederate officer. This is the textbook uniform, right? I mean, there's no doubt. What are some of the key things in this image that tell you this is a Confederate officer versus a federal officer?
Right off the bat, the collar rank, when you look at that, that is the rank. 1 bar would be a second lieutenant, 2 bars would be a first lieutenant, 3 bars on the collar would be a captain rank. So the collar rank that's worn here immediately, that's the first clue, as Kevin would mentioned earlier. That's the first thing I look at, as opposed to what most likely would have been shoulder boards on a federal uniform. Just zooming in here, when you zoom in on the image, you're going to see the layman's term chicken guts, if you will, or the Austrian knot on the sleeve, that highlighted, which is very much synonymous with Confederate officer rank. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, when I'm looking at the construction of this uniform with the cuffing and the style, if you were to go through the regulation plates of a Confederate uniform, this coat's in there. It's also a frock coat. If you can look off to the side of the leg, you'll see the coat drapes off the side of the leg, which is very synonymous with that particular rank, that field officer grade. But what I really like is when you look at the sword, if you can kind of highlight over the hilt of the sword, that is definitely a pre-Civil War sword. Speaking of antebellum, this is most likely, I forget what we looked at. When you look at it really close, it's almost resemblance of an eagle pommel type sword. So we're talking 1840s, 1850s style sword. So between the coat, the rank, the kepi again being highlighted the way it is, it's painted in a way that Confederate field officers or even staff officers would have in terms of identifying the rank with the gold gilt. So it's just to me, it's a fabulous image.
And Kevin, as we're scrolling through here, is there any image that you would consider your favorite here? Of course,
Yeah.
I think we make the announcement, right, that like
Yeah.
the images you two mention as your favorites, those are the ones no one's supposed to bid on, right? Just leave
No,
those
no,
alone, let them go, right?
exactly. I'm going to share my honest favorite, but in exchange for no one else bidding on it. No, I spent all weekend talking about this image. This sale has generated a lot of buzz in the collecting community, and my favorite lot, and one of the lots that's really getting a lot of traction, is lot 30. So I think you're sort of right there. We're using this image as sort of our kind of our featured image or our banner image. I distinctly remember sitting in our offices in Columbus going through this collection. And, when I took this image out of its bubble wrap, my jaw basically hit the floor. It is a tintype. It is a 6-plate tintype. And what we're looking at here is a soldier from Alabama. And I can get into why we know that, in a second. But to me, this is really the kind of the consummate Southern military image. It really rewards very close examination. First of all, there's an incredible clarity to it. Like, he's wide-eyed. Let's not read too much into it, but he looks very intense, like extremely intense. And he's really, really proud to be there. You can see he's got a shotgun, which is obviously not a military issue weapon, which was very common in Southern photography at the beginning of the Civil War. This might even be his gun that he brought from home. He's got a knife stuck in his belt. He's got that interesting, what we would call a Georgia frame buckle on his belt. Don't let the name fool you. Soldiers from a lot of Southern states use that style but it was a really like utilitarian belt buckle that you see in a lot of Confederate images. A subtle detail is that cap box right to the right of the buckle. The flap is sort of stuck up. The corner is stuck up. That's what you start to see. That meant it was used. The more you open and close that flap, you're pulling it by the corner, you're going to bend it. And so you can see that there was some use there. But the star of the show and what is remarkable about this image to me is that the only thing that the photographer tinted was that first national flag pinned to his chest. First of all, the rarity of something like that, the fact that we have two of these in this auction really blows my mind. But the rarity of that detail in an image is really they're very, very hard to find. Good luck finding another one, I guess is one way to put it. But it's really kind of carefully and thoughtfully tinted by a colorist or the photographer themselves. And if you zoom in on that flag, you can actually see that it was made of lace. You can kind of see like a scalloped edge all around that, and it's attached to him with a little ribbon. And what that tells me is that someone made that at home, whether it was his family or someone in the community, and it's such a striking counterpart to how heavily armed he is. Like, this guy is ready for war, and yet he's kind of choosing to highlight this delicate, kind of almost sweet memento from home that kind of describes the cause that which he's about to do battle for. I mean, it's so detailed. You can see like they little tiny stars were sewn in the canton. They're subtle, but you can see them. It's so clear to see them. So it's a really remarkable piece. We know he's Alabama because there's at least one other image featuring this exact same little flag out there, and we know that has a rock solid ID to an Alabama unit. It was a partisan Rangers unit. I think they were the 51st Alabama Cavalry Partisan Rangers. They basically rode around Tennessee with Wheeler. But there's another. This image was published by my friend Larry Jones in his kind of iconic Confederate calendar back in the early '80s, so probably about 40 years ago. I've never seen it before. I that before seeing it in Pat's collection, and it is a really remarkable image. If I'm excited to see where it goes at auction. The next caretaker is going to be very happy with this one, but it's a highlight among highlights, at least for me.
And this is the second one here, right? With the same.
Correct. It's not the exact same flag. It's the same flag. It's a Confederate First National flag. It's not the same flag accessory, but again, you have another probably really new recruit. This guy has a mix of what's mostly all civilian clothing, right? But he has some accoutrements that are kind of consistent with like early war, maybe pre-war militia use. But he's a new recruit. Again, that instant creation of a soldier from somebody who might have been a clerk or a fireman or whatever he was doing, and the moment before he signed up to fight. And he couldn't wait. He couldn't wait till he got a uniform. He just threw on whatever he had that made him look like a soldier, sat down a photographer and said, "Here I am, and this is my cause." So as Southern photography goes, this is another. It's tough for me to choose my favorite. If you made me pick, it'd probably be Lot 30, but Lot 31's pretty awesome too. That's no slouch. Another great image.
I think what's really cool about this, Paul, when you look at these images, going back to tying that history with the other image with Alabama, for example, a lot of people would see that shotgun and say, "Oh, that's a photography prop." Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I do know for a fact, for example, that there were Alabama units here that fought at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson that did carry shotguns and even had bayonets made specifically to put on the shotgun. The other image that had the flag on it, little details like when you look at the hat, a tar cover wheel hat, for example, and then the belt was basically a breastplate, most likely an NCO plate that was fashioned into a belt buckle. It's just the little details like that that make these images so much more than just a portrait for a lot of reasons.
Well, I know when we talk about Confederate images, you hear Rees mentioned constantly. We have a Rees image here. It really does stand out. It's striking to me. When we're talking about Rees, who are we talking about? I mean, don't know if John or Kevin either, or if you want to just kind of dive into this Virginia image.
I'll let Kevin take this one because I'm sure he's more read up on Rees specifically. And I've got one tickler about this image that I think would make people want to go look and see who this might be. But Kevin, I'll let you take that.
Sure. So, I mean, Rees is Charles Rees. He was a photographer who ultimately settled and opened a studio in Richmond, Virginia. And when the Civil War, started, Richmond was obviously the Confederate capital. It was a bustling place. It was full of soldiers, and we know that soldiers love to take have their pictures made. I think we estimate, the Military Images magazines estimates that like 4 million soldier photos might still exist. So only imagine how many were made. But Rees has kind of become a star in the Civil War photography community. He was an extremely talented photographer. He had a really interesting perspective. He was a very artistic photographer. He was also an artist. He started making daguerreotypes, and then eventually, as the technology changed, he transitioned into ambrotypes. But he was very particular about the way there was always like sort of a dramatic pose and the use of certain studio props and especially color. To really make his images some of the most iconic in that field. And he did something that almost no one did, which is, in some cases even signed the images, like literally in the emulsion. He would write his last name. So, that's an extra bonus sometimes with the Rees image. But the good news for collectors is that they're very recognizable. And so the one we see here is sort of a classic column, a classic Rees portrait of an officer standing by a column. That seemed to be kind of a thing that he did with officers. Stand up, full standing portrait, head to toes, sort of next to this prop column. And, we're going to try to make you as prominent or as sort of impressive as we can by kind of taking getting your whole person in this picture. Super desirable by collectors. Rees has kind of become like the Van Gogh of Civil War photography. So super competitive market for them, whether they're civilian or military. This guy happens to be very much a military officer. He's a major. is a great subject. I love the I love the facial hair. I wish I could pull off that kind of facial hair. But John, you have me really kind of intrigued here. What this tickler, as you called it, was all about.
Yeah. Well, when I started looking, because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there were Rees photographed several well-known Confederate officers, correct? I mean,
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
I believe I've seen a Lloyd Tillman image of Rees. Let's see. I know. I think I've seen a John Porter image of Rees that was taken by Rees, and there were other notable officers that had been taken images by Rees. But that facial hair was very unique, and I started looking around, and one of the officers that this looks very much like is Major Richard Dowling. He was actually from Louisiana, and that facial hair is just, if you can zoom in on that mustache, I don't know if there's enough mustache wax in existence to keep this one going, but they had very similar features. But look at that thing. I mean, it's the kepi painted the way it is. That's a high grade officer's kepi. The uniform is just impeccable. It's a fabulous image. And this one, I believe, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this a half plate or quarter plate?
I think this is, I believe it's a quarter plate. I think that's what we have it cataloged. That is a quarter plate. I'm looking at it, in this, and I can say definitively it's a quarter plate.
Okay.
He typically made larger format portraits of officers, which I find interesting. So, they're either quarter plate or even larger, half plate size. But I do kind of like that idea a lot. I know, John knows his stuff. So, I tend to trust, I tend to trust what he has to say. I think folks should listen, but it's irrespective. Like, you can kind of see here a little bit. I know we're looking, kind of through a screen, but Rees had a very interesting way to bring out the lifelike qualities of his subjects. And you can kind of see, like, he achieved that almost like a from life. Well, it is from life, but it looks almost like a photo, like a modern photograph in a way, in the sense that, like, he was able to add coloring to his skin to kind of bring him almost alive. Like, no one was doing this. Like, they would do the rosy cheeks, or but Rees kind of took it to another level and tried to really almost create a hybrid of a painted portrait and a photograph in a way. He was really a pioneer, I guess, in early for North or South.
What I really liked about the image is he almost looks relaxed.
Yeah.
So many images of that time look very rigid, and you've got to sit still, and there's but he almost looks very relaxed in this image, just like what Kevin mentioned, that you would be taking a picture at a restaurant or at a birthday party. It's very relaxed, and it looks very lifelike and almost, modern in the way it's set up. But these images speak for themselves. They don't need a lot of words to support. And when you see a Rees image like this, it's one that would definitely complement any collection for sure.
Yeah. And one thing that another little detail that kind of illustrates how talented Rees was, I've heard photographers say, if your subject isn't comfortable, it's not going to be a good picture. So your job is to kind of make someone, like, pose them in a way that makes them physically comfortable. And so if you see what he did here, just kind of clever, is the major has his forearm resting on a big book, so that he can hold that hat without sort of like just having it floating. You can almost like test it yourself. Like, if you're holding that hat in your hand, you're trying to hold it for the long exposure, it could slip, or maybe it's just not that comfortable. We don't stand like that. But when you're resting it on something, it's a breeze. And you can just kind of see, like, that those little subtleties made him a real master of the arts. It makes sense. He was practicing for a long time. He really was full of himself. He had a big ego, and he advertised as such. He really he was a self-promoter, but he was really, it was valid. He was really good at what he did.
Well, I would say definitely, he's a master at his craft. And one of those things, I believe we spoke about it when we had Ron Coddington on, is how people will pose with certain objects, whether it's their sword or revolver, you name it. But when you look at how they're holding it, 9 times out of 10, you'd say that is very uncomfortable to hold it like that. That's not a natural way. And I'm going to go out there and say, I don't think anyone would hold their forge cap or kepi like that, but he's holding it specifically to show the embroidery on the top of the hat. It's done purposefully, and yet you can still look and feel like this is a natural, relaxed pose when it's done so purposely and with intent. It's just
Yeah.
fantastic.
One more thing, just to kind of add one more comment about this image is totally normal and common for soldiers from outside of Virginia to get their picture taken by Rees. It's the capital of the Confederacy. Officers came up all the time on business. So, you know, there's plenty of well-documented examples of soldiers from basically every state in the Confederacy coming into Richmond and stopping to get a portrait while they were there from the best in the game.
Yep. I think one image that I would love to have Kevin's take on is, in my opinion, we talked about what our favorites are, but I'm kind of dipping into the mind of Pat a little bit, but my gut tells me one of his favorite images was the helm image. When you looked at the display that Pat did along with Dennis, this was a display that stretched over right around 40 feet, so 5 8-foot tables long. They placed these artifacts on a handmade paper mache rock facade, and placed all of these artifacts to where you were almost looking at it, you know, very naturally outside, or just laid in where they would have been after the battle. And each item had a number, and they would go through and give the brief history as you walked through. So you weren't just looking at the items. Each item had a number, and then the history associated with it out in front, so whoever was viewing this could read it. Outside of everything they had, this display had a flag, it had Spiller and Burr revolvers, there were swords, there were other images. This helm image, which is, I believe, the second to last lot in the auction, was the centerpiece of the entire display. And it had a very unique prominence up above and in the center of this entire display. And it's riveting. The clarity, the size. Kevin, I don't know when you saw, I grew up looking at this image since I was around 17, 18 years old. I'm getting ready to turn 50. So that gives you an idea of how long these images have been in this private collection that are now being offered. But I know this one was a highlight for both collectors.
Which lot is that? Is this right here?
47. Yeah.
47?
So, you know, I want to be extremely clear for listeners here. You know, what we're talking about here is stunning. Like, you know, I've been doing this for about 20 years, and I've cataloged a lot of images, and I've you know, handled many more. And you know, the scarcity of a full plate ambrotype, it is huge, and it is a first generation image, which means it was not an enlargement. It was not copied from a smaller format. This man paid a substantial amount of money to have this image made back then. It is a huge piece of glass. It has impressive wall power, and it is so well executed. It's almost beyond belief, whether you're talking about just the clarity of this image or the way the image was enhanced with gold and some color. It's so professional. Like, this was you know, whoever made this did a fantastic job. And I'm glad you brought this image up, because you asked me what my favorite image, and I said lot 30, and I stick by that. I like that image a lot, but this one is almost like I can't even process it yet. Like, it's not my favorite because I didn't want to even believe this exists. You know, it was, you know, incredibly rare photo. But one thing that gets me really excited about this photo, and I'm always happy to feedback here, but we were talking about Rees. Like, it is my opinion that this very well may be a Rees image. You know, Rees had a particular way of making photos, a very unique way of making ambrotype photos. He operated in kind of a scarce process called the relievo style ambrotype, which meant that he only used black backing behind the subject to give it sort of almost a three-dimensional quality. The emulsion itself was almost tinted to give it kind of so it's not clear. And so it allows that, you know, that combination allows that subject to sort of pop off the plate. This has every hallmark to me of a Rees image. I can't say definitively it is. It's not signed, but it's a tantalizing possibility, because we know for a fact that Helm, even though he was in a Mississippi regiment, spent a lot of time in Richmond, a lot of time in Richmond. He was there for months because he was sick and he died there. And so he had plenty of opportunity to walk into Rees's studio and have this photo made. So, you know, I think it's more likely this was made in Richmond while he was there than somewhere in Mississippi, because this was maybe beyond the you know, the material capacity of a smaller town sort of photographer where he was from. Again, it's kind of an informed speculation, but you know, if we could definitively pinpoint it as a Rees, it just, you know, I mean, it'd be a huge discovery for the study of these photos. It is a special image.
And if you could go back to that image real quick, I think another clue to what Kevin's talking about is when you zoom in and you look at the artistry around the guillotine of the image, when you, like, for example, into that sword, they went as far as to gilt the wire wrap around the leather grip. They went as far to highlight the brass sword hangers and throat, which are synonymous with Confederate swords. And the buttons themselves are gilded just enough not to overtake the uniform or any cloth around. It's just very well done, very well executed. Yeah. And obviously the size of the image had a lot to do with how easier to do those types of things with this image, but it wasn't taken for granted and it was done very nicely. Yeah. So
whether it was Rees or not, I mean, whoever made this really knew what they were doing. They did a spectacular job, and it's totally, when you see it in person, like, our pictures online can't possibly do justice because this thing is just so giant. But you know, whoever winds up with this image is, I mean, this was his centerpiece for a reason. And this is the one, you know, this is the one that you could see from probably 20 yards away when you were at a show, because it's just so big and powerful. Just a remarkable piece, and it survived in extraordinary condition, which is wild for such a big piece of glass, which is so fragile. But in any event, it's a real pleasure to have gotten the opportunity to even just hold this.
And we're looking at great name here, the Choctaw Rangers, right?
Mm-hmm.
We spoke about that, you know, great nicknames for Civil War units. This definitely is up there. I think last time we said Sunflower Dispersers takes the cake, but this one definitely ranks up there for sure. The uniform with that embroidery, that's definitely European inspired, correct? Or
I think that's probably accurate, John. I mean, I don't want to jump over you there. It looks like you were getting ready to say something.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, it's subtle embroidery on the coat, but this was very early war, Mississippi, and if I'm not mistaken, this particular regiment, as part of Jeff Davis Legion, was out east in the Eastern Theater, and just like a lot of the early Western Theater units, both in Tennessee and Mississippi, went east and fought early on with the goal of protecting Richmond and subduing that there until the war found its way west, which then some of those men would come back and fight in the Western Theater. But I think it's just one of those unique images with a unique regiment, a very famous regiment.
Mm-hmm.
And the name supports just you know, how interesting those early regiments were that came out of the West.
Well, perfect. So I think we covered a great amount of images here. There's just so many to talk to. We could talk about this all night, but there's a couple things that I want to do before I let you all go, because I don't want to steal the night from you. But I did want to share with our viewers some of the images in your own collections, because that's what this is all about, is being able to collect these items and caretake for them, be stewards of history, and then share them as Pat Booth did. And I guess I'll pull this up here. John, you're our Western theater expert. I guess let's talk a little bit about what we're looking at here, and then maybe this will guide us into your own collecting, and you can talk a little bit about that, and we can move on here. But maybe closing it out here. Let's close it out with some Western theater brother in arms here. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, what I think is really neat is, and again, I believe this was also published in the Confederate calendar, if I'm not mistaken, Kevin.
Yep, correct.
And these are both 9th plates. But what strikes me is the image on the right. If you could zoom in there just a little bit. Number one, You have that style of Western theater. The name escapes me right off the top of my head, put on the spot, but the early beehive hats. This one doesn't really construct to the true beehive Confederate hat, but with that infantry tassel off to the side, you probably either that's part of the tassel in the hat or potentially a squirrel tail that's adorning the hat, some sort of animal fuzz right on the side of the hat. You've got that interesting red wild looking shirt that's exposed, most likely around a battle shirt or something that's open there. But if you come down just a little bit, you'll notice he's got that revolver across his chest there. Most likely with the size of the hand against that pistol, you're probably looking at a pocket 49 7-inch barrel, something of that size across the chest there. But if you go up just a little bit, even the facial expressions just have that Western theater feel to it, both in the way the hat's adorned, non-regulation, and then the pocket 49, which would have been a weapon readily available in the South for anybody to have their image taken with. So to me, that of both parts, that image just strikes a keen interest in, especially what I've seen in a lot of Western theater images.
So this is a Western theater face right here. Just watched you give a whole explanation for from the style and everything like that. You are our resident Western theater expert, and there's an image that I wanted you to share with us today, and I know I twisted your arm for it. Could you talk about in your collection what I like to, well, I don't want to spoil the story, but your image that we spoke that we would share about, not part of this auction, but in your personal collection. I'd love to talk about that one.
Sure. Do you have the image available to show?
Let's see if I can pull it up here. Okay. 1 second.
All right. There it is.
There it is.
So first off, you're very kind to consider me an expert on the Western theater. I don't really consider myself an expert in anything, because that usually means you're very good at one thing and you screw up everything else in your life. So I try to be very broad in my abilities to do different things. But being an expert can put you in a box sometimes. So I appreciate that. But I very much, having lived out here and been around this history and grown up in this area, it is one that is dear to me in terms of studying Civil War history. Well, let's talk about 1862 real quick. In February of 1862, everybody's very familiar with the battles of Fort Donelson and Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, rather, in chronological order, with the fall of Fort Donelson on February 16th, 1862. And as both the Confederate armies were moving south, retreating southward out of Nashville and into Mississippi and Alabama, the Northern armies were following as well. And as a result of that, much of the rivers and the ability to move goods were kind of left open. And so Grant in the Western Theater started putting units in a lot of these southern towns. I live in Dover, Tennessee, which is where or near where this image was taken. But Dover sits on the Cumberland River, which if you were to go and follow that river all the way upriver, you would end up in Nashville, Tennessee. So it was a major thoroughfare for both shipping goods, weapons, men, and supplies further south. 12 miles west of here is the Tennessee River, which is what Grant would use to take troops and disembark from places like Savannah for the Battle of Shiloh, for example. So fast forward from 1862, there would be a lot of guerrilla activity in this region. As soon as the battle would end, just in August of 1862, there would be an attack on Dover by Confederate guerrillas led by Colonel Thomas Woodard and Adam Rankin Johnson to take on supplies and goods here in Dover. The following February in 1863, both Wheeler and Forrest would attack Dover to try to again take supplies and goods and recruit pro-Southern men in the area. And as a result of that, along with all the other minor skirmishes around West Tennessee, Grant would start to bolster the Union presence in these areas, both Clarksville, Dover, Paris, Fort Henry, for example. And it would be after that August of 62 engagement that one of the regiments that would show up here in Dover would be the 83rd Illinois. The 83rd Illinois Infantry, the bulk of them were from Northern Illinois, men from Monmouth, Peoria, Rockford, places up in that area in Northwest Illinois. And they would be here from August of 1862 all the way through late 1864. The regiment would be split. Half of the regiment would be 30 miles east of here in Clarksville, Tennessee, which also set on the Cumberland River as it winds around on its way to Nashville. And the other half of the regiment would be here in Dover, Tennessee. Their primary goal, and they would ride, and I have numerous letters of the men from the 83rd Illinois, but they would take off and would ride in what they called missions. We would call them sorties today. And they would spend a week riding around the countryside, checking on locals that might be pro-Southern, checking on telegraph repair crews, checking on telegraph wires, monitoring the guerrilla activity in the area. And that was primarily their goal throughout the rest of the war. In August of 1864, there were 11 men of the 83rd Illinois that were sent out to repair or to guard a repair crew near the Great Western Furnace, which sits approximately 8 to 10 miles north of Dover on what today is called the Trace, or in the land between the lakes area. It sits right between, it's an isthmus of land between the Cumberland and Tennessee River. And while they were there, this was around August 17th, they were sent up there and they spent 2 or 3 days there. And on August 20th, there was 11 of these men camped there, and they were notified by a civilian that there was Confederate guerrillas in the area. So the Confederate guerrillas were on horseback, obviously, and these men took off after them, 11 men, and went westward towards the Tennessee River near a place called Pine Bluff on the Tennessee River. They caught up with the guerrillas, they fired at them, and they dispersed, and they felt like they had taken care of the situation. Little did they know, when they turned around to come back, these 11 men now found themselves ambushed by a little over 110 men of what was thought to be Colonel Thomas Woodard's Confederate cavalry guerrilla group. They engaged them. The men of the 83rd, these 11 men, tried to disperse and hide. They were pulled out of houses, executed, and all but 3 were killed, all but 3 men. One of them was captured and later released. One of them made their way back to Dover, and the other one was shot twice, I believe, and had a saber gash to the face. That particular private, Private Marion Morrison was his name, crawled up and down the banks of the Tennessee River for nearly a week with these wounds, hiding from Confederate guerrilla, waving at boats as they were passing by on the Tennessee River, Union gunboats and supply transports, until finally one picked him up and took him back to Paducah and took care of him, dressed his wounds, got him back to health. He actually rejoined his regiment just a few weeks later. So this story lived on for quite a while, and Marion Morrison goes and rejoins his unit. He survives the war. He goes home, goes back to Northern Illinois. And not long after the war, it would be in 1869, Marion marries Welta Chase Parsons, his wife. They have 4 children together: George, Guy, Pearl, and the last one, Clyde. Now, what's interesting about Clyde is born on August 20th, 1884, 20 years to the day that his father, Marion Morrison, gets wounded and shot on the battlefield at this Pine Bluff incident in August of 1864. Clyde grows up. Clyde gets married to Mary Alberta Brown. And in 1907, May 26, Clyde and Mary have their first son. This would be Private Marion Morrison's grandson. in honor of his grandfather, Clyde's father's service, and how he thought of his father. He named this young man, their newborn son, Marion Morrison, after his grandfather. Marion Morrison would grow up and they would move out west. And Marion would find himself working on the sets of movie sets and helping schlep equipment around until one day he got his chance at acting and actually starring in one of these films. And Marion Morrison didn't sound much like a hard stage Western actor's name, right? And that name would be changed to John Wayne. And so the image that you're looking at right now actually has John Wayne's grandfather in it. John Wayne's grandfather was Marion Morrison, which was John Wayne's original name, named after. And Marion Morrison was the one who crawled up and down the banks of the Tennessee River. And if he had died, as one of his other comrades had, there would have been no John Wayne or any of the 200 movies that John Wayne starred in. Now, how does that relate to this image? Well, I have numerous letters, and the incident that happened in Pine Bluff in August of 1864 was written about by many of the soldiers of the 83rd Illinois. And one of the benefits of collecting a regiment that was garrisoned is that they had a lot of time to write letters, and they had a lot of time to get their pictures taken. As such, there were several letters that I have that mention this engagement and specifically talk of Marion Morrison and the other two men that were lucky to escape. This image showed up on eBay several years ago, and with it was a letter with this image written by a Robert McClellan. And there were pictures of the letters that were broken up. So one piece had Marion, another piece of the picture had Morrison. I started putting this together, and I'm like, by chance, just by chance, could this be a letter or an image of Marion Morrison? So when I received this image and letter in the mail, not only was it written by one of the gentlemen in this picture, but they identified every man in the image. And I wanted to read you just real quickly an excerpt of this letter, which identifies the men in this letter. This is written by Private Robert McClellan of Company B, and he is the gentleman standing on the far left. So he is the man in the beard right there. This is that gentleman. I will send you a photo of our mess so you can see what a lot of fine-looking young men is in it. They are all in the same mess, but the orderly he was for a while, but is not now, is a widower. His name is William Struthers. He is the son of old Riley Struthers. Next to him is Marion Morrison. So he talks about his orderly sergeant. The gentleman, that's William Struthers. Next to him is Marion Morrison. He is the boy that was left on the field for dead when our captain was killed and crept off and hid himself. And when they went after the bodies of the others, he could not be found. And he was there from Saturday noon to Monday evening without a bite to eat and all covered with blood and dirt. He crept around and did not know where nor which way he had happened to go on the Tennessee River. And there was a transport came along and tried to hail it, but no, it did not stop. And another, and they would not stop until the next gunboat came and took him aboard, dressed his wounds, and gave him something to eat. Now, when you look at this image, he identifies everybody in the image. And if you want to start from right to left, we can do that real quick. But in the image is William Struthers, who's the sergeant, Marion Morrison, that's John Wayne's grandfather. Next is Josiah Moore. Next is Robert Stevenson, John Martin, Robert Gowdy, Robert P. Morrison, and then the last gentleman is Robert McClellan. What's interesting is the two men sitting down in front, James Neely, who is on the left, and Joseph Moore is on the right. James Neely was with Marion Morrison and was the gentleman who was captured and then later released. So there are two of the three survivors of that incident in this image. But to me, it's a regiment that not a lot of people know about. In an area after all of the big battles had moved farther south, not a lot of people know about. But had this gentleman had died on the banks of the Tennessee River, it would have significantly impacted modern culture and the culture of a lot of our fathers and grandfathers who grew up watching John Wayne movies, whether it was Westerns or movies like The Green Berets. So to me, it's just a fascinating image and ties a lot of those stories that we often forget about around the Civil War.
I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. And I think we're talking a little bit about this before, but I guess also in this unit was one of the Earp brothers, correct?
That is correct. Virgil Earp also served in the 83rd Illinois. And Wyatt was too young to serve in the Army, but Virgil did serve. He is noted as manning or assisting to man the 32-pounder that was removed from the fort and put in the town square, and was actually firing that gun against Forrest and Wheeler when they attacked in February of 1863. So Virgil does have quite a history with the 83rd. Not all good, because we also have Virgil's name written in the Provost Guard book as being in jail in Clarksville for unbecoming a soldier by gambling and stealing money. So the Earps we know about the OK Corral, they do have a colored past and a colored history, but Virgil was a member of the 83rd Illinois and served here in Dover at Fort Donelson.
Well, that's something I would like to say is we like to talk about Untold Civil War, obviously, on this podcast. Western theater, unfortunately, seems to get overlooked, which should not be the case. And so if you are interested in exploring the Western theater, I mean, right here, if you're a fan of John Wayne, if you're a fan of Tombstone, you got to study the Western theater. It's all there. So, but absolutely fantastic image.
Yeah, we talked about this just briefly, but one last thing is that we know that Virgil Earp and even Wyatt, I mean, more so Wyatt Earp would be on the sets of some of these Westerns when they were being filmed in the early 1900s. And it is noted in a couple biographies that John Wayne had either met or had discussed or talked to Wyatt on some of these sets. A lot of them attribute to Wayne trying to learn how the Western gunfighter walked, talked, acted. But a part of me has to think that they have that commonality of both their relatives serving in the 83rd Illinois. Did that ever come up in discussion? And was that the common thread that kind of got them together, because they had a brother and a grandfather that served in the same regiment, which I think is fascinating.
Oh, absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And I really appreciate you sharing that
great story.
And I have to say, this, when I went to my first show, which was the Civil War Faces show in DC a few years back, you gave a presentation and you shared this image. And from that moment, I knew that I had to have that on my podcast. So that was the one image.
I'm glad we finally made that happen, but I really appreciate you allowing me to share it.
No, thank you. And now, Kevin, there I was sitting. Kevin, I've had you on the podcast a couple of times, and you've always, I've always fallen over by looking at some of the images in your collection, and you shared one early on with me that really caught my eye, and I'm just going to share that image right now. If you give me a second here. Kevin, what are we looking at here? I mean, this is phenomenal.
We're looking at an image that was found in a garage sale about 2 years ago, which should serve as inspiration for anybody who's so inclined to keep pounding the pavement, because good stuff is definitely still hiding out there. So what we're actually looking at here is a member of the 2nd United States Sharpshooters. This man, we know his identification. His name was Thomas, which is kind of ironic since what we've been talking about quite a few times during this podcast. But his last name was Rees, just like the photographer. Except he was from Minnesota, and he and two brothers were fought in the Civil War. There was a company of the U.S. 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters who was from Minnesota, and this is one of them. When I'm collecting photographs, Civil War photographs, I tend to be more of an aesthetic collector. I'm looking for a really great photo. One thing I really appreciated about John's CDV that we just saw was not only is there an incredible story to it, it's a really good photo. I'm a sucker for an outdoor view, something a little more candid than a studio shot. So this was taken outside. This was taken in the field in Falmouth, Virginia, probably in June of 1862. Rees is really proud here because he's showing off his brand new Sharps rifle. So in the field of Civil War photography, a few things really ring a lot of bells, and one is firearms. Sharps is not commonly seen in images. Very, very desirable. It was a great weapon. I know that the sharpshooters loved these weapons. They strongly preferred them to, for example, Colt revolving rifles, which they had previously. But I am also a sucker for gear. I love an image that shows off kind of a common foot soldier that has all of their equipment in the picture, which again is kind of a hard thing to find in a Civil War photograph. What we see here is extraordinary because it kind of combines everything I'm into in one photograph. It's well composed, it's clean, it's a nice image, but it also has all this stuff, so you can study it and kind of learn what was going on with the sharpshooters around that time of the war. One thing I kind of love before I get into the military details is that this is such a simple studio. It's basically a canvas backdrop, probably stretched between a couple of trees. And they dressed it up a little bit with some pine or evergreen fronds to, I guess, give it kind of a forest look, or it's a little unique. It's not something that you see very often in this kind of photography. You see a painted backdrop or no backdrop, but rarely do they use sort of like the natural environment as a backdrop. But I digress. What he's got here is he's got his entire pack kind of on the ground, and he's resting his hands. He's balancing himself on his blanket. So his blanket is rolled up on top of his backpack, and he's resting his rifle in his hands on that blanket to steady him. You see it basically almost in the dead center of the image. The rear sight is up. So he's pretending or giving an impression of a sharpshooter actually being a sharpshooter. He's getting ready to take a shot, which is as sharpshooter images go, I'm not really aware of another one. So it makes it pretty rare and pretty special. But you see all of the equipment that the sharpshooters had, which was actually kind of unique. And if you're doing an impression or you're just sort of studying this really fascinating and hard fought group of guys, this gives us a lot more information about what they were up to and what they had. And so one of the things that I know some of my friends who are really study U.S. sharpshooters, there's a little kind of a silver square kind of just below the rear sight that's attached to the front of his backpack, just under the bedroll. And that's a mess kit. They had a specially issued mess kit, and it had all of their gear so they can eat in there. Almost never seen in a photograph. They knew it. We know it existed because there are written sources that say that, but we rarely, if ever, see it in pictures. We see a haversack, which appears to be kind of greasy and stuffed with probably rations. We see his canteen kind of tipped over on the side, and he's just got this great look about him. He's showing probably the folks at home what it means to be a sharpshooter, what his job is in the Army. And these guys were everywhere. They were in the thick of all the greatest battles of the Eastern Theater. Even though he himself was from Minnesota, he had to take a shooting test to show off his proficiency with the rifle just to get into this kind of elite group of infantrymen. And for me, the combination of the gear that's seen in this image and the candid, really unusual kneeling pose, kind of aiming a weapon, is kind of makes it, to me, the consummate sharpshooter image. I'm really lucky to have it. It surfaced in 2024, and I got a chance to talk to the person who found it, and it really was just kind of loose in a garage sale, which is just mind blowing. So again, I said it at the beginning of my little spiel here, but good stuff is still out there. Pound the pavement. Subsequently, kind of cool, I actually found a copy of his regimental history. So the second USSS has a regimental history, as a lot of Civil War regiments do, but I have the version that was inscribed to him. So I have a little more of a piece of the puzzle of this particular soldier who was at some of the greatest battles, doing some amazing things.
Absolutely fantastic. It really is. And like I said, when I saw this image, when you shared it to me and I saw the equipment, I saw the pose, I said, that's a Kanberg image. Absolutely. We were talking about that. When you look at someone's collection, you can sort of get a feel for what they're looking for, what their taste is. And this for sure was a Kevin Kanberg image when I saw it. We also noticed there's something in his hat here. Do we know what that is? Or
that is a feather. So the true sharpshooter scholars out there like this hat, because this was headgear that would have been associated with kind of an earlier time for the sharpshooter, kind of like their origin when they first kind of came into service. Most of those had gotten lost by the time this picture would have been taken, but Mr. Rees here seems to have, done a good job in preserving that gear. So it's got a kind of a really complete look. I like to say, I like to try to find my perspective on collecting photographs is I like to find, like, at least in my judgment, the best of the category, like best in show for that particular breed, right? And as sharpshooter images go, there's a lot of great ones out there. This for my taste is ranks up with some of the best I've ever seen. It'd be tough to upgrade. I hope I do. That would be something else. But this is this is pretty good for now.
No, it's absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much for sharing this image. Both of you, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and speaking about this upcoming auction.
Yeah,
if I can just hit here. So real quick, maybe Kevin, you want to share with us, when is the auction? When should people be gearing up, going to Adam Fleischer's website and getting ready for this?
Well, first and foremost, I appreciate the invite. It's always a pleasure to be on with you. This podcast is a favorite of mine, and it's always a real pleasure to be on here. So we are 10 days, 13 hours, and at least from the time of recording of this, away from the sale. It's on October 9th. It starts at 10 a.m. Eastern time. It'll be on multiple platforms. I do recommend that anyone interested download or go to the Fleischer's Auctions site or download the Fleischer's Auctions app. It's a great, simple to use format. There's other ways to bid. You can bid through live auctioneers and other online platforms, but the Fleischer's app is pretty slick. That's what I prefer when I'm bidding. But again, it starts in less than 2 weeks. There's actually 3 days of sale coming up for Fleischer's. The first day is the Pat Booth collection. It's so special, we gave it its own day, and deservedly so. So image collectors, it's all we got at this sale. And then we have another day full of incredible American historical treasures, everything from colonial era artifacts to more modern day military artifacts and other, political, Lincoln, you name it, it's in there. A lot of incredible African American history. And then day 3 is dedicated to Civil War. John and I will probably be watching that day pretty closely. There's probably 350 great lots in that sale of really high end. Everything, swords, weapons, pictures, cloth, you name it, it's in the sale. Some incredible paper, broadsides, you name it. So I recommend plenty of time, no excuses, plenty of time to sign up as a bidder. Good luck to everybody. But yeah, Pat Booth, October 9th.
Well, thank you so much again. And hopefully we'll have both John and Kevin, both of you, come back on the podcast. Always happy to do new content and collaborate. And I really appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure, Paul. Take care.
All righty. Be safe all. And thank you again.
All right.
Thank you, Paul.
Take care. Bye now.
For now.
John, great job. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.